Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at a game between two previous world chess champions, Anatoly Karpov, who had the white pieces, and Garry Kasparov, who had the black pieces. And I'd say this is Garry Kasparov's best game, in my opinion, and that's saying a lot because Garry Kasparov is an absolutely legendary player, as is Karpov, but because this was a game against Karpov, that's what makes this match that much better, because Karpov is a world-class champion, and the fact that Garry Kasparov was able to put him in absolute binds that you'll see in this game is just absolutely amazing. This was actually a World Chess Championship match that was in 1985, and it was being held in Moscow. So, without any further ado, we'll kick it off. Karpov plays e4, and we see the Sicilian defense with c5. And after knight f3, e6, we see the Tiamanov variation. d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. Black plays knight c6 here, and after knight b5, you can see white's threatening to come to d6 here, so black prevents that with d6. White plays c4 just to lock down on d5, which is a key break in the black position. And after knight f6, now we see knight c3, standing behind this pawn and just keeping an extra grip on d5 while protecting e4. Black kicks the knight here with a6, with the knight falling back now to a3, which is a rather embarrassing square for the knight to fall back to. But now we see a gambit which was beginning to become a little popular back during this period with d5. So clearly black is just ignoring the fact that white has a grip on this square and he's just going for it to open some lines. So after c captures, e captures, e captures, you can see white's won a pawn here. And now the black knight hops onto b4. So the b4 knight controls d3, c2 very nicely. Now Karpov had actually prepared bishop e2 for this game, and Kasparov plays bishop c5. This might have taken Karpov a little by surprise because it hadn't been played yet, I believe. And Karpov actually had the option of playing bishop e3 here, because after bishop e3 and captures, white could play queen a4 check, getting rid of this pesky knight here on b4. And after bishop c5, something like queen e4 check, this would have turned out to be pretty okay for white. However, for whatever reason, white decided not to go for this variant, and instead he just castled kingside. So black castles kingside too, and now after bishop f3, you can see white has a very firm grip on this d5 square. But black didn't give up his pawn for nothing. He gave it up for activity and lines, and the first thing he does is he plays bishop f5 here, and this controls d3 and c2. So this knight is going to have a much harder time trying to find its way back into the game through squares like c2, for example, because of this control. White, of course, is very aware of this, so he plays bishop g5. And here, white threatens bishop e4. And why do I mean this as a threat? Well, if bishop e4 is allowed to be played, then black's advantages will essentially evaporate. And that's the control of this diagonal here, and the control of the c2 square and d3 square. Of course, you can't capture this because of the pin, and you wouldn't want to allow this either, because that's just as bad. So black's aware of this, of course, it's Kasparov, so he plays rook e8, preventing this bishop e4 idea. So white here connects his rooks with queen d2, and now b5 absolutely locks this knight out of the game. It can't come to c4 now, or c2. It's completely locked out, and black actually threatens to play b4 if this knight wasn't here, because that would fork both of these knights here. So white gets his rook into the game, that was out of the game on a1. And after knight d3 now, you can see that black has an absolute powerhouse here on the d3 square. This knight controls e1 and c1, and these are the two open files in the game. So because of this control of e1 and c1, white's going to be unable to challenge black on these files. So white has to try find a way to kick this knight. It's not going to be easy. But first he has to deal with the threat of b4. So because of that, this knight steps back to b1, and you can see that this is a very pitiful square for the knight to find itself on, and it's stepping on this knight's toes as well. So white is already in a lot of trouble here. His pieces are very uncoordinated and they're very cramped in. And just for the price of a pawn, black is absolutely dominating at this stage. Black puts the question to the white bishop here, and he doesn't actually have a lot of choices. If bishop e3 is played, there are tactics like this, for example, which are very nasty. This would be very favorable for black, this exchange sacrifice. So he can't drop back to e3. And capturing the knight here would also be very good for black too, because he'd have bishop pair and control these two files, and this would be great. So white knows he can't do either of these, and he drops his bishop back to h4. Not being able to do much else. b4 now is played kicking this knight, which comes to the side of the board, and you can see now that both of these knights are just completely out of the game. To prevent knight captures, the black bishop pops back to d6. And now white figures, you know what, I may as well just try to trade with you or do something. Again, it's white's in a complete bind here, so he's finding himself short of moves. Black just grabs the open c file now, so he has control of the ENC files, which is just really exasperated by the fact that this knight's sitting here on d3 very nicely. Now this is the first critical point in the game where white plays b3, and this is where Kasparov's brilliance starts to really shine through. Because you can see that the purpose of b3 is to play knight b2, because that would challenge this key knight, and if this is allowed to happen, white would be able to unwind. He'd be able to get his rooks onto these files and he'd be okay. So black has to do everything he can to prevent knight b2. And he does this by playing g5. Now you may be wondering, how does g5 actually prevent knight b2? Well, it prevents knight b2 because after knight takes, queen takes, g4 threatens the bishop, and after bishop e2, rook c2 forks both of these, and of course the rook here is backed up by this bishop, so you'd lose a piece. So that's what prevents white from playing knight b2. And he can't even kick this knight with bishop e2, because then he walks into knight e4, which comes with threats like bishop takes g3, for instance. Attacking the queen with the bishop, which is backed up by this knight. And this knight is backed up by this bishop, so white can't even take this one. And after something like queen d2, knight takes e2 would win a piece. It's backed up by this rook here. So white's finding himself in this terrible bind, and he tries to unravel it first with bishop takes d6, and after queen takes d6, now g3. So the threat of knight b2 is back on, because if g4 is played like we saw in that earlier variation, white doesn't have to come here now, he can come to g2. So black has to prevent knight b2 all over again. So how does he do this? He plays knight d7. And again, it may seem obscure why knight d7 prevents knight b2. But if knight b2 is played, queen f6 threatens the knight. And if you capture, black will capture back. And capturing here on d3 walks into knight e5 and you lose your queen. No matter where you go here, you're going to lose your queen as white. If you go here, fork. If you go here, captures with threat of queen, rook takes queen next. And of course this rook controls this file and this pawn is protected. So white's in a lot of trouble if this is allowed. And even if you play bishop g4 instead, stepping out of this threat and threatening bishop takes knight, knight e5 is played anyway. You can't step off this diagonal because black has knight f3, forking the king and queen. So Kasparov had seen all of this. It just goes to show what a legendary play he truly is. So again, knight b2 has been prevented. So bishop g2 now is played, which means that this knight e5 threat, if it were to happen, wouldn't fork the bishop and queen, etc. So the threat of knight b2 is back on again. But now Garry Kasparov is able to prevent it a lot more simply with queen f6, which is a more direct way of preventing knight b2. So white's in a bind here, and he doesn't find himself with much to do. So he plays a3, and after a5 we have captures, captures. Doesn't change the situation much at all. And queen a2 is played with the idea of playing knight d2. But Garry Kasparov again is able to prevent knight d2. And he does this with bishop g6. And again, it looks so subtle. You may be wondering, how is knight d2 prevented from bishop g6? Well, the answer is rook e2. And we can see now that because this bishop dropped back, the queen is attacking f2 now. And after rook e2, you'd have 1, 2, 3 attackers on this f2 square. And there's nothing you can really do about that. So Garry Kasparov again prevents white from untangling his position just through these really subtle and indirect means. Now white pushes the pawn here. He's just really short of moves. Garry pushes his own pawn, just covering this h3 and f3 square. The white queen comes back because it knows that this is just a failed mission, so it aborts that, and it decides to threaten h6 now. So the black king just steps up calmly. Black has all the time in the world in this position. He doesn't have to rush anything. He's got complete control. f3 was played in the match, and here Karpov was... apparently he was low on time, so without much else to do, he just decides to go for this. That allows queen takes d6, and after f takes g4, we see queen d4 check, which pushes this king into the corner. Now this is always a bad situation when you've got a queen and knight with a king in a corner like that, because there's always threats of this sort of stuff and smothered mate, etc. But after king h1, black plays knight f6 now, and this threatens knight e4 or knight g4, both very deadly because of this control of this f2 square that would arise. So the white rook steps up to try cover these two squares, but black just says, you know what, I'm going to play knight e4 anyway, and there's nothing you can do about it. And this threatens the queen, of course, and also there's a lot of threats like this on the board, and also there's a lot of things that are hanging and that are loose right now. White captures the knight, but this just loses the queen after knight f2 check. Because you can see that after rook captures, this bishop now drops this queen. So now it's really just a matter of technique in terms of how Garry Kasparov decides to clean up this match, and he doesn't disappoint. After rook fd2, queen e3 is played, which just appears to give this bishop up, but he doesn't really, because after rook takes bishop, you have rook c1, another fantastic move. And the idea behind this, of course, is if you capture here, white takes this rook with check, and then this rook would be the next one to follow, and you'd have this bishop here and knight forked. So you can't have that happen. There's no way you can allow that. So after rook c1 is played, white just decides to play knight b2 instead. But it's all to no avail, really, because now Garry Kasparov plays queen f2, another unbelievable move. And the idea here is that if you take this rook, well, you're just going to get mated down here anyway. Because after captures, bishop f1, queen capture here, you'd you'd be a goner. It also threatens rook e2, because if rook g1's played, queen captures g2 is also mate, because this rook is pinned against the king here. So white instead decides on knight d2, but after rook takes d1, white throws in the tower, because of course you could play this on with knight takes d1, or the finishing blow actually was rook e1. Apologies, I got that messed up. This was the final move in the position, because this is very clearly mate, so you can't have that happen. And that's the only move in the position, so this would be all over. So I would say that this is Garry Kasparov's greatest game, in my opinion, because of the way he was able to keep Karpov in this absolute bind. Just incredible how he was able to do it without even having to do it overtly, just through really subtle maneuvers and threats that he saw many moves ahead. And on top of that, the fact that Garry was prepared until move 19 here as well is incredible, in my opinion. So that's all I've got. That's the game. I hope you found that fascinating, as I did. And let me know, did you think that this was Garry Kasparov's greatest game? In my opinion, it is. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts. But until next time, see you guys. Bye.